The moment Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the studio stage, the air shifted. Not from fear or celebrity, but from the quiet confidence she carried, like a candle that refused to flicker in the wind. She had never been on a stage this big, nor faced an opponent this fierce. Across from her sat Robert De Niro, the Oscar-winning actor known for his powerful performances and his equally powerful political rants. His reputation as a blunt and fiery liberal was well established, and he made no effort to hide his disdain for conservatives. Many feared going up against him in a live debate. Karoline, however, didn't flinch. It all started with an email from a popular television network. Subject: Invitation to debate on the Spotlight, Robert De Niro panel. Karoline nearly laughed when she read it. Surely this was a trap. A setup to embarrass her, to make a mockery of everything she stood for. But something tugged at her. The same something that pulled her toward every challenge she'd faced in her life. The same voice that reminded her, you weren't made to play small. Karoline had grown up in New Hampshire, the daughter of a factory worker and a public school teacher. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was rich with values. Her parents taught her to pray before meals, to open doors for strangers, and to speak up when something felt wrong. She got into politics because she was tired of seeing ordinary Americans ignored. Not demonized, dismissed. Forgotten. So, when the invitation came, she didn't hesitate. I'll do it, she replied. The media caught wind of it almost instantly. Conservative firebrand Karoline Leavitt to debate Robert De Niro live on national television, the headline screamed. Some laughed. Some cheered. Others warned her to back out. But Karoline didn't do this for attention. She did it for the people back home. For the waitress who'd served her coffee that morning with tears in her eyes about inflation. For the mother in her inbox begging for help after her daughter was kicked off the school soccer team for refusing to share a locker room with boys. For the soldier who'd emailed her, saying, no one listens anymore. But I think you would. The day of the debate arrived, and New York City buzzed with anticipation. Protesters gathered outside the studio holding signs on both sides. The building was a fortress of lights, cameras, and tension. Backstage, Karoline knelt beside her dressing room chair and prayed. Not to win. But to speak truth. She rose, adjusted the small silver cross around her neck, and stepped toward the set. The moderator opened the segment with a brief introduction, then got straight to it. We are joined tonight by two very different voices in America. On my left, legendary actor and outspoken activist Robert De Niro. On my right, former congressional candidate and political commentator Karoline Leavitt. Tonight's topic, the soul of America. The crowd was already electric. De Niro leaned forward, his eyes piercing. Let's get real, he said. People like Karoline are the reason we're in this mess. They sugarcoat hate with patriotism. They sell fear as freedom. And I'm sick of it. Cheers erupted from half the room. Karoline smiled, not shaken. With all due respect, Mr. De Niro, I'm not here to sell anything. I'm here to speak for people who feel like no one's listening. Not Hollywood. Not Washington. Not even their neighbors. He laughed mockingly. Oh, please. You mean the people who stormed the Capitol? Karoline took a breath. I mean the single moms who work 2 jobs and can't afford groceries. The veterans who can't get the care they were promised. The kids in rural schools without working heaters. Those people. The audience fell quiet. De Niro wasn't expecting that. She continued, her voice strong but calm. You act like I'm your enemy. But I'm not. I want the same things you do. Safety. Opportunity. Dignity. We just disagree on how to get there. De Niro leaned back, visibly frustrated. You wrap it all up in kindness, but the truth is, your policies hurt people. Karoline looked him in the eye. And your words divide people. Words have power. And when someone with your platform calls half the country a bunch of threats to democracy, you're not helping anyone. You're hardening hearts. The moderator looked stunned. The audience was dead silent. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a takedown. But it landed like a hammer. Karoline didn't gloat. She didn't grin. She just paused, and then turned toward the audience. My grandfather was a janitor, she said. He cleaned schools for 40 years. He didn't vote the way most of this city does. But he loved this country. He paid his taxes. He served his community. Are you telling me he was a threat to democracy? No, someone whispered from the crowd. I'm tired of us judging people by their party before we know their name, Karoline continued. I'm tired of us shouting when we could be listening. And I'm tired of pretending like compassion only exists on one side of the aisle. A woman in the second row wiped a tear from her cheek. De Niro tried to interject, but his voice cracked with emotion. You're good, he said, barely above a whisper. I didn't expect you to be so human. Karoline looked at him, softening. I didn't expect you to listen, she said. But I'm glad you did. The show wrapped. The camera faded to black. But the internet? It lit up like wildfire. Clips of Karoline's poised responses and De Niro's stunned silence dominated social media. Phrases like, Karoline Leavitt destroys De Niro, and the calmest mic drop ever, trended for days. Some called it a takedown. Others called it a miracle. But Karoline didn't see it as either. She saw it as a spark. And she wasn't about to let it go out. It was barely 6 a.m. when Karoline's phone began to buzz like a jackhammer. Dozens of missed calls. Hundreds of texts. Her inbox was flooded. Twitter mentions, off the charts. YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, clips of her debate moment were already racking up millions of views. Her calm, heartfelt defense of forgotten Americans had struck a chord across the country. But Karoline didn't check the trending hashtags first. Instead, she poured a cup of coffee, sat at her kitchen table in her modest New Hampshire home, and read a handwritten note that had arrived days before the debate. It was from a young girl named Maddie in Oklahoma. Dear Ms. Leavitt. I heard you speak last year at my school. I didn't understand all of it, but I remember how you said people like me matter, even if we live in small towns. My mom works 2 jobs, and she always tells me to be strong. You make me want to be strong too. Karoline smiled, blinking back tears. That's why I do this. Her phone buzzed again. A new email. Subject, about last night. From Robert De Niro. She hesitated. Click. Karoline. You surprised me. Not just with your words, but with your grace. I've been doing these debates for years, and I've never walked off stage feeling convicted. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. No cameras. No crowd. Just a conversation. Karoline stared at the screen. This wasn't the Robert De Niro the world knew. This was something else. She thought back to the look on his face when she told the story of her grandfather. For a moment, the fire in his eyes had flickered. And what replaced it wasn't defeat, it was recognition. They met at a small Italian cafe in Midtown Manhattan 3 days later. No media. No press. Just 2 people sitting at a corner table, both trying to figure out how to bridge a national divide. De Niro was the first to speak. You got me, he said, stirring his espresso. You didn't scream. You didn't insult. You just spoke. Karoline smiled. That's kind of the point, isn't it? We've all forgotten how to speak to each other. All we do is shout past the noise. He nodded slowly. I've been angry for a long time. I thought that was power. But watching you, that was power. They talked for over an hour, about family, faith, policy, and pain. Karoline shared more stories from her hometown: a farmer who lost his land to unfair regulations, a widow who couldn't afford heating oil that winter, a high schooler suspended for reading a speech that included a Bible verse. And De Niro listened. Really listened. "You see things I never have," he admitted. "And I've been wrong to ignore those voices." Karoline leaned in. "We all have blind spots. But what matters is what we do when we realize it." Then he asked the question she didn't expect. "What if we did something together?" Karoline raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Something real. A conversation series. Town halls. Community events. You and me. Red and blue. Side by side." She blinked. "You want to co-host a unity tour?" "Why not?" he shrugged. "I've spent decades tearing people down. Maybe it's time I use my platform to build something." Karoline paused. It was risky. People from both sides would attack her for it. But then she thought of Maddie. Of the veterans. The single moms. The coal miners. The kids in rural towns who'd never been heard. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." The announcement broke the internet. Leavitt and De Niro launch Common Ground Tour. Unlikely duo promotes unity across America. Is this the start of something new? The first event took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city caught between its blue-collar roots and modern political divides. The venue was a renovated high school gymnasium, packed with over 1,000 people from every walk of life. De Niro opened with an apology. "I've spent a lot of years yelling," he said. "But yelling didn't change a single heart. Karoline did that for me. And now, I want to pay it forward." The room erupted in applause. Karoline spoke next, standing at the center of the stage with no microphone, just her voice. "We've been told we have to hate each other. That we can't possibly love our country and disagree. But I believe we can. And I believe we must." The crowd stood. Cheered. Some cried. Over the next few weeks, the tour visited 10 cities: Detroit, Tulsa, Des Moines, Birmingham, Phoenix, and beyond. They didn't avoid hard topics. They faced them, together. And everywhere they went, stories poured out. A Democrat and a Republican hugged after a Q&A in Nashville. A teenager from Atlanta said she wanted to run for office. A retired police officer and a community activist in St. Louis exchanged numbers and started a joint mentorship program. What had started as a televised debate had become a movement. And it was changing lives. But not everyone approved. Some in the media called it performative. Others accused Karoline of selling out. How could she stand next to him, they asked. Karoline's response: "He stood next to me. And if I believe in second chances for America, I have to believe in them for people, too." De Niro received hate mail from both sides. Hollywood friends called him a traitor. Activists called him naive. But he didn't stop. "I've played heroes on screen," he told a crowd in Dallas. "But Karoline showed me how to be one in real life." The two of them, side by side, defied every stereotype. She was young, faith-driven, and unapologetically conservative. He was older, brash, and liberal to the core. And yet, on that stage, they were just two Americans who believed in something bigger. The tour had been going strong for nearly 2 months when tragedy struck in a small town just outside Lexington, Kentucky. A deadly tornado tore through the community, destroying homes, businesses, and lives. Among the wreckage was a local church that had hosted one of Karoline and Robert's unity events just a week earlier. Karoline sat in stunned silence as she watched the news. Families she had just hugged, gone. A pastor she had prayed with, missing. Her heart sank. She immediately called Robert. "We have to go back," she said without hesitation. He didn't need convincing. The next morning, they arrived on site, dressed in work clothes and boots. There were no cameras, no announcements. Just Karoline and Robert, side by side, carrying water bottles, clearing debris, and comforting the grieving. A woman with dust-streaked cheeks approached them, holding a broken photo frame. "You came back," she said, tears in her eyes. Karoline took her hand. "Of course we did." Word spread quickly, and soon dozens of volunteers joined them. What was meant to be a short visit turned into a 3-day effort. Robert spent hours helping a retired teacher find her lost wedding ring among the rubble. Karoline sat with children, telling them stories of strength and rebuilding. That week, they weren't politicians or celebrities. They were neighbors. Helpers. And that changed everything. The news caught on, but this time, it wasn't about the drama, it was about the compassion. Headlines read: Leavitt and De Niro quietly volunteer in tornado relief. From debate to disaster relief, unity in action. An elderly man, interviewed by a local paper, said, "They showed up when we needed them most." That's real leadership. When Karoline and Robert finally left Kentucky, neither spoke much. The weight of what they'd seen hung in the air. But as they boarded the plane back to New York, Karoline turned to him. "You were a hero this week." He looked at her with uncharacteristic humility. "No. You were. I just followed your lead." She shook her head. "No, we followed each other." It wasn't a viral moment or a trending soundbite. It was real. And in that quiet space, both of them knew, their mission had grown beyond them. The final stop of the Unity Tour was set in Washington, D.C., a symbolic gesture that felt both bold and necessary. The nation's capital, so often defined by division, was now hosting a night built on connection. The venue? A modest outdoor amphitheater near the Lincoln Memorial. No flashing lights. No glitz. Just rows of folding chairs, an open sky, and two people who had once been strangers. Karoline stood backstage, heart steady, hands folded. She thought about how far they'd come, not in miles, but in meaning. From sparring on live television to healing tornado-torn towns, she and Robert had done something many said was impossible. She caught a glimpse of Robert pacing, rehearsing nothing, just breathing. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, then chuckled nervously. "I think this is the first time I'm not performing. Just, speaking from the gut." She smiled. That's when it matters most. When they walked on stage, the audience rose in silence. It wasn't applause. It was reverence, for something rare and raw, two Americans choosing unity over ego. Karoline stepped up to the microphone. "We've told our stories," she began. "We've shared our differences. But tonight, we want to leave you with something more powerful than politics, possibility." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. You don't have to agree with someone to show them kindness. You don't have to share their beliefs to see their pain. All you have to do, is care. She turned to Robert. "And I care about this man. Not because we think the same, but because he chose to listen when it was hard. He chose humility when pride would have been easier. And through that choice, we found common ground." Robert stepped forward, visibly moved. "I came into this thinking I'd be the teacher," he said, his voice husky. "But Karoline taught me more than I ever expected. She showed me that bravery doesn't always look like a punch, it sometimes looks like a pause. Like compassion. Like showing up." A hushed moment passed before the crowd stood and clapped. It was loud, yes, but it felt sacred. Not just a celebration of two individuals, but a declaration of hope. As the applause faded, Karoline took a deep breath and said the words that would echo across the nation. "We're not enemies. We're neighbors." That clip, just those 5 words, went viral within minutes. Again. But this time, it wasn't labeled, "Karoline destroys De Niro." No one was destroyed. No one was humiliated. Instead, the headline read, "Karoline Leavitt and Robert De Niro rebuild America, one conversation at a time." In the following weeks, Karoline was asked to write a book. She refused unless Robert could write it with her. They titled it Bridging the Fire. It debuted at number 1. De Niro was honored at a major awards show later that year. During his acceptance speech, he said, "I've won statues, but my proudest achievement was standing next to a young woman who reminded me what real courage looks like. Karoline, you changed me." Karoline, sitting in the front row, wiped a tear. Back home, Maddie, the little girl from Oklahoma, read their book cover to cover. She wrote again. "I used to be scared of people who thought differently. But now, I think maybe we're all just puzzle pieces. We need each other to see the whole picture." Karoline framed the letter and placed it on her desk. She hadn't just survived a televised debate. She hadn't just destroyed a celebrity. She had transformed a moment of conflict into a movement of connection. And in doing so, she lit a spark across a weary country. A spark of decency. Of understanding. Of shared hope. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply choose to love louder than you fight. The end.